Hey everybody, welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Glad to be here.
Today we're going to be taking a look at a book called The Eucharist, a men's guide to reality, leadership, and sacrifice.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about this one. It sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's been making some waves, and it takes this ancient practice of the Eucharist, and it kind of spins it in a way that is really relevant to men today.
Yeah, well, I've been noticing that the Eucharist has been becoming more and more popular, so this is a great time to be diving into this topic.
Yeah, and this book particularly looks at it as a way to kind of explore what it means to be a man in today's world and how it can kind of guide men to a stronger sense of leadership and purpose.
Yeah, so is this book like a how-to guide or more of a theological exploration?
It's a bit of both, actually. It kind of delves into the deeper meaning of the Eucharist, but then it also connects it to, like, practical stuff.
Practical stuff, like what?
Like how to be a better leader, how to deal with the challenges of modern society, even how to understand things like cultural Marxism.
Wow, cultural Marxism. That's not something you hear about every day in a book about the Eucharist.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly. That's what makes this book so interesting. It's not afraid to tackle some really controversial topics.
okay, so where should we start with this? I mean, the Eucharist is a pretty big topic.
Yeah, well, I think the best place to start is with the basics. Just a quick refresher on what the Eucharist is all about.
Okay, sounds good. Most people probably have at least a vague idea of what it is, but
Yeah.
let's break it down.
Right, so the Eucharist is that part of Christian tradition where bread and wine are consecrated, and they represent the body and blood of Christ.
Right, and different denominations have different interpretations of what exactly that representation means.
Yeah, and this book specifically focuses on the Catholic understanding of transubstantiation.
Oh, right, transubstantiation. So that's the belief that the bread and wine actually become the body and blood of Christ, not just symbolically, but in a real way.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
that's a key concept to understand because it kind of underpins everything else the book talks about.
Okay, so how does the book explain that concept? I mean, it sounds pretty mystical.
Well, it gets into some pretty deep philosophy,
Oh, boy. Here we go.
but it's actually pretty fascinating. The book talks about how the Eucharist is this bridge between the physical world and the spiritual world.
Okay, I see. So it's not just about the bread and the wine. It's about something beyond that, something deeper.
Exactly, and that idea actually goes way back to Thomas Aquinas, the philosopher from the Middle Ages.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him. Wasn't he like a really big deal?
Yeah, he was like one of the most important thinkers in Western civilization, and he had some really interesting things to say about the Eucharist.
Like what?
Well, Aquinas argued that the Eucharist wasn't just a symbol or a metaphor. It was an actual conduit of divine grace.
So by taking part in the Eucharist, you're not just remembering Christ's sacrifice. You're actually participating in something much bigger.
Exactly, and the author of this book builds on that idea. He argues that for men especially, the Eucharist can be a powerful source of strength.
So it's not just a religious ritual. It's like a way to tap into something deeper, something that can help you in your everyday life.
Exactly, and that's where the whole men's guide part comes in. The book argues that men today are facing unique challenges and that the Eucharist can offer a way to navigate those challenges.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. But before we get into the challenges facing men today, I'm curious about something.
What's that?
The book mentions Eucharistic miracles, like the one in Bolsena, Italy, where the host allegedly started bleeding. What's the significance of those stories?
Yeah, that's a fascinating part of the book. The author brings up these miracles as further evidence of the power of the Eucharist.
So is he saying that these miracles are proof that transubstantiation is real?
He doesn't explicitly say that, but he presents them as examples of the mysterious and awe-inspiring nature of the Eucharist.
Okay, so whether you believe them literally or see them as symbolic stories, they point to the idea that there's something more going on here, something beyond our understanding.
Exactly, and I think that sense of mystery is a really important part of the book. It's like he's saying there are forces at play here that we can't fully grasp, but that can have a profound impact on our lives.
I see. So it's not just about rational explanations or scientific proof. It's about acknowledging that there's something bigger than ourselves, something that can transform us.
Exactly, and I think that's a message that a lot of men are searching for today.
Yeah, it seems like there's a real hunger for meaning and purpose in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain.
And this book argues that the Eucharist can be a source of that meaning and purpose, a way to connect with something timeless and enduring.
I'm definitely intrigued. So how does the book connect all of this to masculinity and leadership?
That's what we're going to dive into next.
Okay, I'm ready when you are.
All right, let's do it.
Sounds good.
All right, so we've got this idea of the Eucharist as like more than just a ritual, right? It's a
Yeah.
source of strength. It's a connection to something bigger.
Right.
But how does he actually like tie that into masculinity and leadership?
That's where it gets really interesting. The author doesn't just like throw out a bunch of abstract concepts about being a man.
Right.
He uses biblical figures as example.
Oh, okay. So like who are we talking about here?
Well, it talks about Joseph, for example.
Oh, yeah. The one with the coat of many colors, right?
Yeah, exactly. The one who gets sold into slavery by his own brothers.
What a story.
But then he ends up like rising to power in Egypt.
Oh, yeah. He becomes like the Pharaoh's right-hand man or something.
Exactly. And the author uses Joseph as an example of resilience, you know?
Okay, so bouncing back from tough situations.
Yeah, but also forgiveness. Like he forgives his brothers for what they did to him.
Wow, that's powerful.
And he's also portrayed as a strategic thinker.
Yeah.
You know, he's not just strong, he's also smart.
Right, so it's not just about brute force, it's about like using your head too.
Exactly. It's about a deeper kind of leadership.
Okay, so Joseph's the guy who can handle adversity, but what about those times when you need to like fight back?
Yeah.
Stand up for what's right.
That's where David comes in.
Oh yeah, the giant slayer.
Exactly. The classic underdog story.
Everyone loves that story.
And the author points to David's courage, you know, his unwavering faith.
Facing down a giant that takes some serious guts.
And also his willingness to use force when necessary.
So it's like there's a time for peace and a time for war.
Right. It's a different kind of leadership, but equally important.
It's interesting how he's showing like different facets of masculinity.
Exactly.
It's not just one mold.
Yeah.
You know, there are different ways these strengths can manifest.
Right. And then it gets even more complex when he brings in Jesus.
Oh, wow. So how
Yeah.
does Jesus fit into this whole masculinity thing?
Well, you know, Jesus isn't the typical image of a warrior king.
Yeah, he's more about love and peace and turning the other cheek.
Right. But the author argues that Jesus' self-sacrifice, you know, his willingness to endure suffering for the good of others,
Yeah.
that's the ultimate act of leadership.
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Right. It's not about dominance. It's about serving something greater than yourself.
And how does he connect that back to the Eucharist?
He says that by partaking in the Eucharist, men are symbolically enacting that same sacrifice.
So it's like you're taking on that commitment to something beyond your own desires.
Exactly. You're aligning yourself with that kind of selfless leadership.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connections here. How he's weaving together history, spirituality, and this call to a stronger form of masculinity.
Yeah, it's all coming together.
But how does he address the challenges men face today?
Well, you mentioned cultural Marxism earlier.
Yeah.
That's a key part of the book. The author argues that there's been a deliberate effort to undermine traditional values,
Values like what?
especially around gender roles and family structures.
Okay, so the whole like men are the providers, women are the nurturers kind of thing.
Exactly. And he sees this as directly impacting men's sense of purpose, their ability to lead.
So it's not just that men have lost their way, it's like something is actively working against them.
That's his argument. He points to trends like the push for gender neutrality, the decline of the nuclear family,
Yeah, those are definitely hot button issues.
and even the way masculinity is often portrayed in media.
Like men are always the bad guys or the bumbling idiots.
Exactly. He sees these as symptoms of a larger problem, you know, an attempt to redefine what it means to be a man.
In a way that strips away power and responsibility.
Right.
Okay, that's a pretty bold claim. But how does he propose men resist this? Is the Eucharist enough?
He believes it's a vital starting point. He sees the Eucharist as a countercultural act, you know, a way to reconnect with those timeless virtues that are under attack.
So it's like a way to ground yourself in something solid, something that's been around for centuries.
Exactly. And by understanding and embracing the symbolism, the sacrifice, the commitment it represents.
Men can reclaim their strength and their purpose.
Right. It's about tapping into something that transcends the current cultural trends.
Okay, but what about the criticisms of these traditional roles? You know,
Yeah.
a lot of people would say they're outdated, limiting, even harmful.
The author acknowledges those criticisms,
Yeah.
but he frames it in terms of complementary roles. Oh, okay, so it's not about one being superior to the other.
Right. He argues that men and women are different, but not in a hierarchical way.
So it's more about recognizing different strengths that work together.
Exactly. He sees these roles as interconnected, you know, essential for a healthy society.
Like you need both the yin and the yang.
That's a good way to put it.
Right.
And he argues that the Eucharist, with its focus on self-sacrifice and service,
Right.
can help men understand and embrace their role within this framework.
Okay, so it's like the Eucharist provides a model for how men can live out their masculinity in a way that's both strong and selfless.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance between those two aspects.
This is really interesting. It's like he's taking this ancient ritual and applying it to modern struggles.
Right.
It's like he's saying, look, these principles have always been there. They've helped men navigate challenges for centuries.
And they can still be relevant today?
Exactly. It's about rediscovering something timeless, something that can help us make sense of the world we live in.
So we've talked about the historical and societal context, but what about the personal impact?
Yeah.
How does he see the Eucharist affecting man on a psychological level?
That's a crucial aspect of the book, too. He argues that the Eucharist can be incredibly powerful for men who are struggling
Struggling with what?
with feelings of inadequacy, doubt, even despair.
Yeah, those are some heavy things.
And he points to the symbolism of consuming the body and blood of Christ
Right.
as a way to confront your own vulnerability.
So it's like facing your own weaknesses, your own imperfections.
Exactly. And to accept your flaws and to find forgiveness and strength in something greater than yourself.
So it's about letting go of ego, acknowledging weakness, and finding a source of strength outside yourself.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that you're not alone in your struggles.
That there's a power greater than yourself that can offer healing and guidance?
Exactly. And he ties this back to the idea of sacrifice,
Right.
arguing that the Eucharist can inspire men to make sacrifices in their own lives.
So to put the needs of others before their own.
Right. Which ultimately leads to a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment.
It feels like he's advocating for a kind of spiritual transformation,
Yeah.
one that empowers men to become better versions of themselves.
Exactly. He sees the Eucharist as a catalyst for that transformation.
So a way to tap into a wellspring of strength and resilience that can help men overcome personal challenges.
And achieve their full potential.
Okay, so we've covered the historical, societal, and personal aspects.
Right.
Now I'm curious about something we touched on earlier, the symbolism of the Eucharist.
Okay.
How does he unpack that?
Well, he delves into the rich symbolism of the Eucharist,
Right.
arguing that it's not just about bread and wine,
Yeah, right.
but about deeper spiritual truths.
Okay, like what?
He points to the bread as a representation of Christ's body broken and given for the salvation of humanity.
So it's a symbol of sacrifice, of giving yourself over to something greater than yourself.
Exactly. And the wine represents Christ's blood shed for the forgiveness of sins.
Oh, okay. So it's like cleansing renewal, being washed clean from the past.
Right. And the author argues that by partaking in these elements,
Yeah.
you're not just remembering these events,
Right?
you're actively participating in them on a spiritual level.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
You're taking in the sacrifice, the forgiveness, the strength that Christ offers.
It sounds like he's saying the Eucharist is more than just a ritual. It's a way to internalize these powerful spiritual concepts.
Exactly. He sees it as a way to connect with the divine, to tap into a source of strength and wisdom that can guide you through life's challenges.
And he argues that this connection can be particularly powerful for men who are seeking a deeper sense of purpose and meaning.
Right, because it speaks to those fundamental needs that we all have,
The need for belonging, for purpose, for something to believe in.
Exactly.
It's really fascinating how he's taking something ancient and familiar and showing how it can be relevant to the challenges men face today.
Yeah, it's like he's bridging the gap between tradition and modernity.
Offering a timeless source of wisdom for a world that often feels lost and directionless.
That's a great way to put it.
I'm really impressed with this book so far. It's definitely given me a lot to think about.
Yeah, me too. It's a really thought-provoking work.
Okay, so we've talked about the past and the present, but what about the future?
Yeah.
How does he see the Eucharist evolving in a rapidly changing world?
That's a great question, and one that he actually addresses in the book.
Oh, really?
He acknowledges that the world is changing rapidly and that the church needs to adapt to stay relevant.
Okay, but he's not advocating for abandoning tradition.
Right. No, not at all. Instead, he argues for finding ways to integrate the timeless wisdom of the Eucharist.
With the challenges and opportunities of the modern world.
Exactly. So it's about finding that balance between preserving the sacred and embracing the new.
Okay, I like that idea. Can you give an example of what that might look like?
Sure. He discusses the potential of technology to enhance the Eucharist experience.
Oh, wow. Technology and the Eucharist. That's an interesting combination.
For instance, he explores the idea of using virtual reality.
Oh, wow. VR.
Yeah, to create immersive spiritual experiences.
So like you could put on a headset and feel like you're actually present at the Last Supper or something?
Right. It's about using technology to deepen people's understanding and connection to the Eucharist.
Wow, that's a really cool idea.
Yeah.
I can see how that could be really powerful.
And it's not just about VR. he's open to exploring other technological avenues as well.
So it's like he's not afraid to embrace the future while still respecting the sanctity of the tradition.
Exactly. He sees technology as a tool that can be used to amplify the power of the Eucharist.
Not to replace it.
Right.
Okay. I'm really starting to see the vision here. He's not afraid to think outside the box.
He's calling for a thoughtful, nuanced approach to the evolution of the Eucharist.
One that honors its history while embracing the possibilities of the future.
Exactly. It's about finding a way to make this ancient practice relevant for generations to come.
That's really inspiring. I love how he's not just looking backwards, he's also looking forward.
Yeah, I think that's what makes this book so valuable. It's not just a rehash of old ideas. It's a fresh perspective on a timeless tradition.
And a call to action for men to step up and embrace their role in shaping the future.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a truly enlightening conversation. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on the Eucharist.
I'm glad to hear that. It's a topic that deserves deeper exploration, and I think this book offers a valuable framework for that exploration.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on what you found most compelling about this book.
Let me think.
What really stood out to you?
What struck me most was the way the author connects the Eucharist to something much larger than itself.
In what way?
He sees it as a microcosm of the human experience, you know?
So it's not just about religion, it's about life itself.
Exactly. It's about grappling with the big questions of life and death, purpose and meanings, sacrifice and redemption.
Wow, that's a profound insight. It's like he's not just talking about a religious ritual, he's talking about the human condition.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And he's offering the Eucharist as a tool for navigating that condition.
A source of strength and guidance for men who are seeking a deeper sense of purpose and belonging in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain.
Right. It's about finding a way to make sense of it all.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah. I agree.
This has been a truly enriching deep dive. I'm so grateful for your insights.
The pleasure was all mine. It's
Yeah.
always rewarding to engage in conversations that challenge us to think differently and to explore new perspectives.
And to remind ourselves of the things that truly matter.
Yeah.
The things that give our lives meaning and purpose.
Absolutely.
Okay, so as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into the Eucharist, a men's guide to reality, leadership, and sacrifice, I'm getting this feeling like it's more than just theology.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know what you mean.
it's like a whole different way of being in the world, like a roadmap for men who are trying to figure things out.
Yeah. And he really taps into those anxieties that men are feeling today.
Right, exactly. It's
Right.
not just about showing up for communion on Sunday. It's like, how do you actually live this out?
Well, he talks about discipline, self-mastery, being a man of your word.
Right, like those old school values.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he talks about the importance of strong male friendships,
Yeah.
mentorship, building those communities.
Like that brotherhood aspect,
Yeah.
guys supporting each other.
Yeah, holding each other accountable, pushing each other to be better.
But how does that translate to like real life? We're not living in biblical times anymore.
He says those principles are timeless. Whether you're leading a family, a business, a community.
Those qualities like courage, integrity, selflessness.
Exactly. Those are always going to be relevant.
So it's not about trying to fit into some stereotype of what a man should be.
No, it's about tapping into something deeper.
Something that goes beyond all the cultural trends.
Exactly.
And this whole idea of sacrifice keeps coming up.
Right. It's central to his argument.
It's not just about giving something up.
It's about commitment to something bigger than yourself.
Exactly.
And he ties it back to the Eucharist. Christ's sacrifice becomes the model.
So when we sacrifice our own comfort, our desires for something greater,
we tap into a deeper power and meaning.
it's like losing yourself to find yourself.
Exactly.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
This Eucharist, it's more than just a ritual, huh?
Yeah. He really makes you think about it in a whole new way.
Well, this has been a fascinating exploration. I feel like we could keep talking about this for hours.
Me too. There's so much more to uncover.
For our listeners who want to dive deeper, where can they find the book?
It's called The Eucharist, a men's guide to reality, leadership, and sacrifice. And it's available on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Awesome. We'll be sure to include links in the show notes. And as always, we encourage our listeners to check out the book for themselves and come to their own conclusions. This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.